Hello, my friends. Did you know there was once a man who created some of the greatest music in human history, while slowly becoming completely deaf? Some people say Beethoven was a genius born for greatness. Others say his painful childhood and loneliness created the fire inside his music. But here is the incredible truth. Before the world called him a legend, he was just a frightened little boy named Ludwig van Beethoven, forced to practice music until tears ran down his face. And yet, that same boy would one day change music forever. This story will help your English. Before we begin, comment, "Ready," if you believe difficult moments can make people stronger. And if you enjoy learning English through emotional stories, please subscribe for more. The winter air in Bonn was cold and heavy. Inside a small house, a baby cried loudly into the night. His name was Ludwig van Beethoven. No one knew it yet. But this tiny child would one day create music that people would still listen to hundreds of years later. But Beethoven's story did not begin with glory. It began with pressure. His father, Johann Beethoven, was a musician with dangerous dreams. He wanted his son to become the next great child prodigy. A prodigy means a child with extraordinary talent. Johann believed music would bring fame, money, and respect to the family. So from a very young age, little Ludwig was pushed mercilessly. Again, faster. The sound of shouting often filled the house late into the night. While other children slept peacefully, Beethoven sat at the piano with exhausted eyes and aching fingers. Sometimes he cried quietly while practicing. Sometimes he made mistakes because he was too tired to see clearly. But his father did not care. Perfection. Only perfection mattered. Can you imagine that? A small child forced to play music for hours while fear stood behind him, like a shadow. Yet something unusual lived inside Beethoven. Even through pain, music spoke to him naturally. The piano keys felt alive beneath his fingers. Melodies flowed through his mind like rivers. At only a few years old, he could already play difficult music beautifully. Neighbors whispered about the strange, talented boy. "Have you heard him play? He sounds much older. That child is special." But nobody saw the loneliness hidden behind the music. Only his mother understood. She was gentle, quiet, and kind. Whenever Beethoven felt broken, her soft voice calmed him. But then, life became harder. Johann's anger grew worse. Some nights he came home drunk and demanded Beethoven perform immediately. The little boy would sit at the piano, trembling with fear, while his father watched closely from the darkness. Yet during those painful moments, Beethoven discovered something powerful. Music could express feelings, words could not. Sadness, fear, hope, anger, love, everything inside him became sound. One evening, after hours of exhausting practice, Beethoven stayed alone at the piano, long after everyone else slept. The candle beside him flickered softly. The room was silent. Slowly, his fingers touched the keys again. But this time, he did not play for his father. He played for himself. The melody was soft and emotional. For the first time, Beethoven felt free. That moment changed him forever. Music was no longer just practice. It became his escape, his voice, his future. As the years passed, his talent grew rapidly. People across Bonn began noticing the young musician with fierce eyes and magical hands. At only 11 years old, Beethoven performed before large audiences. The concert hall glowed with candlelight. Rich nobles watched silently. Beethoven walked toward the piano, feeling small, nervous, terrified. His hands shook. His heart pounded loudly inside his chest. What if he failed? What if everyone laughed? But then he closed his eyes. He remembered every painful night, every tear, every lonely hour at the piano, and suddenly, the fear disappeared. His fingers began to move. Beautiful music flooded the hall, fast, powerful, alive. The audience stared in shock. Some people leaned forward breathlessly. Others whispered in amazement. This was not ordinary talent. This was genius. When the performance ended, applause exploded across the room. Beethoven bowed quietly, but deep inside, he felt something strange. Even success could not erase the sadness he carried since childhood. And soon, an even darker challenge was waiting for him. Years later, Beethoven moved to Vienna, the center of European music. The city was beautiful, elegant, and filled with famous musicians. Beethoven dreamed of becoming one of them. At first, Vienna loved him. People admired his passionate piano performances. His music sounded different from everyone else's, emotional, wild, alive. But behind the growing fame, something terrifying had already begun. One night, Beethoven sat alone composing music when suddenly he stopped. A strange ringing filled his ears. At first, it seemed small, just a little noise, nothing serious. But the ringing returned again the next day, and the next. Voices became unclear. Music sounded distant, like hearing the world through thick walls. Fear slowly entered his heart. "No," he whispered softly. "Not this, not music." A doctor examined him carefully. The room felt cold and silent. Finally, the doctor lowered his eyes sadly. Beethoven's hearing was getting worse. There was no cure. The words hit him like a storm. A composer losing his hearing? It felt impossible, cruel, like fate itself was laughing at him. If you were Beethoven at this moment, would you continue fighting or give up? Comment fight or quit below. Beethoven walked slowly through the dark streets of Vienna. Rain fell softly around him. But the most painful thing was not the cold. It was the silence growing inside his world. Every morning he woke hoping his hearing had returned. Every morning reality crushed him again. Voices sounded distant. Laughter became unclear. Even music, the thing he loved most, slowly disappeared from his ears. At first, Beethoven tried hiding the truth. He smiled during conversations, even when he could not understand the words. He avoided crowded places. He stopped meeting friends. Inside, fear consumed him. How could a composer survive without hearing? How could his life continue? But then, the darkness became even heavier. One lonely evening, Beethoven sat at a wooden desk beside a weakened candle flame. His face looked tired, broken. In front of him lay a letter. Slowly, painfully, he began writing his deepest thoughts. He wrote about loneliness, about shame, about hopelessness. He confessed that sometimes he wanted to disappear from the world completely. Despair means a total loss of hope, and Beethoven was drowning in despair. The room felt painfully quiet. Outside, Vienna continued living normally. But inside that small apartment, a genius was collapsing. Can you imagine that? The man creating beautiful music for the world, secretly fighting unbearable sadness alone. For a long time, Beethoven stared silently at the piano across the room. He wondered if music had abandoned him forever. Then something unexpected happened. A memory returned. He remembered the frightened child in Bonn, the little boy forced to practice through tears, the lonely teenager fighting fear on stage. That boy had survived everything. Maybe this man could survive too. Slowly, Beethoven stood up. He walked toward the piano carefully. His fingers touched the keys gently. He could barely hear the notes now, but he could still feel the vibrations. Vibration means a movement or shaking sensation. The sound traveled through the piano into his hands, his bones, his heart, and suddenly Beethoven realized something extraordinary. Music did not only live in the ears. Music lived inside him, inside his imagination, inside his soul. Tears filled his eyes, not tears of weakness, tears of understanding. From that moment forward, Beethoven refused to surrender. If he could not hear music normally, he would create music differently. Day after day, he composed obsessively. He pressed his ear against the piano. He imagined melodies clearly inside his mind. The silence around him grew deeper, but the music inside him became stronger. And strangely, his compositions changed too. They became more emotional, more powerful, more human. People listening to his music felt something new: pain, courage, defiance. Defiance means refusing to accept defeat. Beethoven was no longer simply composing melodies. He was fighting fate itself. One famous piece after another poured from his imagination. The Fifth Symphony thundered with energy and struggle. The Moonlight Sonata carried sadness and beauty like moonlight over dark water. Then came his greatest dream, the Ninth Symphony. A symphony is a large musical composition for an orchestra. Many people thought Beethoven was finished. A deaf composer leading huge musical works sounded impossible. Some critics whispered behind his back, "He cannot continue. His best years are over. Silence has defeated him." But they were wrong, terribly wrong. Late at night, Beethoven worked endlessly by candlelight. Pages of music covered the room. His hair looked wild. His eyes burned with determination. Sometimes he looked exhausted beyond words. Yet still, he continued writing. Every note became a battle cry against despair. Here is the surprise. The less Beethoven could hear the outside world, the more powerful the music inside him became. Finally, the night of the great performance arrived. The concert hall in Vienna overflowed with people. Everyone wanted to witness the impossible. Could a deaf man truly create a masterpiece? Beethoven stood on stage, facing the orchestra. He could not hear the audience. He could not hear the musicians clearly. Only silence surrounded him. But inside his heart, the symphony roared like thunder. He lifted his hands. The music began. Softly at first, then stronger, bigger, more emotional. The orchestra played with passion and fire. And when the choir finally sang the joyful final movement, the audience was overwhelmed. Some people cried openly. Others stared in complete amazement. It felt less like a concert, and more like witnessing the victory of the human spirit itself. But Beethoven heard none of it. When the music ended, he continued facing the orchestra silently, unaware of the explosion happening behind him. The audience had risen to their feet. People clapped wildly. Cheered shouted his name. A singer gently touched Beethoven's shoulder and turned him toward the crowd. What he saw stole his breath away. Hundreds of people standing, applauding, crying, honoring him. For a moment, Beethoven simply stared in disbelief. Then tears rolled down his face. Not because he had defeated deafness, but because silence had failed to destroy him. That night, Beethoven became more than a composer. He became a legend. Years later, his body grew weaker. Illness slowly consumed him. Yet even near the end of his life, music still lived inside him like an eternal flame. Eternal means lasting forever. Friends gathered quietly beside his bed. The room was peaceful. Outside, the sky above Vienna was gray and heavy. Beethoven opened his eyes one final time. Softly, he whispered that music had been his life, his voice, his victory. Then silence carried him away forever. But strangely, the silence did not win. Because long after his death, Beethoven's music continued traveling across the world. Through concert halls, through radios, through headphones, through generations of human hearts. A lonely boy from Bonn, a man crushed by deafness, a genius who refused to surrender. His body disappeared, but his music became immortal. And even today, when people hear Beethoven's symphonies, they do not only hear notes, they hear courage, they hear pain transformed into beauty. They hear the sound of a human spirit refusing to break. My friends, the story of Ludwig van Beethoven reminds us that life is not about avoiding suffering. It is about transforming suffering into strength. Beethoven lost one of the most important things in his life, his hearing. Yet he still created beauty that changed the world forever. So when life becomes difficult, remember Beethoven. Remember the boy who cried at the piano. Remember the man who faced silence and still gave music to humanity. May you continue learning, growing, and believing in your own strength. Peace and success to you always. And keep learning English through stories. Lessons. Pain does not always destroy people. Sometimes it creates greatness. True passion can survive even the darkest struggles. Your limitations do not define your future unless you surrender to them. If Beethoven's story inspired you, please subscribe and comment below. Do you think Beethoven became greater because of his suffering or despite it?